Hello! Welcome to week 4 of the Quilt Cut Along. Can't believe we're almost done. We're starting to get into kind of the business end of garment sewing. This is when the quilt coat is going to really start to come together, which is super exciting, but also a little bit daunting. Just take a deep breath. We're going to walk you right through it. It is really nowhere near as hard as it looks. We're going to dive into making your pattern modifications and making sure that your pattern is going to fit you really well. Again, please don't let this daunt you. We're going to walk through every single step. It is nowhere near as hard as it sounds. Let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off and we will dive in. Just a couple of quick reminders. Again, please stay muted until the end of the Q&A portion, just so we kind of keep the background noise to a minimum. If you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand. That's just going to start a queue that I can just kind of run through the questions in order, so it's super organized. As always, we do have a sew-along hub on my website. It's just guiltyquiltystudio.com/sew-along. This is where all of the stuff related to the sew-along is going to be kept. So all of your blog posts, links, the link for joining the Q&A, also a place where you can post your progress pics. Go ahead and check that out. That's where all the resources are, as well as the recordings of these Q&As. Okay, so this week, we got two things we got to cover. First is taking your measurements, which I am going to kind of show you on my cheapo bust mannequin that I have over here. I just use this for taking pictures of bags that I'm going to list in my Etsy shop. Some of these measurements are going to kind of cover some sort of sensitive areas, so I figured it would be less awkward for me to show you on a mannequin than on myself. So we've got 6 measurements we got to take. I'm going to walk you through each one. The first one is going to be your bust measurement. So this is just the circumference around the fullest part of your bust. And you can see when I kind of turn to the side, you can see it's around the fullest part of the bust and it's flat across the back. Really important here that you don't have it angled one way or the other. You also want to just breathe normally here. Don't try to like suck in the inner tube or stand up straighter than you normally do. Just stand naturally and take your measurement. Again, we're making the garment fit your body, not your body fit the garment. Really important here. All of these measurements are just numbers. That's it. Don't get in your head about it. We're just taking your measurement so that the garment is comfortable on you. So that's the bust measurement. The second measurement we're going to take is the waist measurement, and this is going to be around the narrowest part of your waist. That's usually right at the bottom of your rib cage, but wherever it is on you, that's where you want to take the measurement. And again, important that we have it kind of flat across the back here. We don't want it angled. So that's your waist measurement. The third critical measurement that you're going to take for any pattern that you're making is the hip measurement. And that's going to go around the fullest part of your hip, which is usually down like across the middle of the fly of your pants. Again, want it flat across the back. Don't be angled here. Those are kind of the 3 critical measurements that you need. Those will be in every single garment pattern. You're going to need to take those measurements and compare it to the pattern. There are 3 additional measurements that are kind of preference measurements, I'll call them, but they can be helpful for getting kind of the lengths to fit you properly. So you're going to take these measurements, but you're going to take them understanding that you're making a choice about the preference of where you want the garment to be. So the first one is just the length measurement, or the hem measurement, and it's going to go kind of from the middle of your shoulder here down to wherever you want the garment to sit. So if that's kind of low on your hips, that's where you want to take the measurement. If you want it kind of cropped, take the measurement there. That's going to be your length measurement. The next one is going to be the arm length measurement, and it's going to go from wherever your sleeve starts all the way out to your wrist out here. So you can see I'm kind of, I don't have arms on this mannequin, but it's going to look something like that. Critical thing here is that if you're going to do that raglan or ralgan pattern type where the sleeve is going to go all the way up into the shoulder seam here, take it from the shoulder. But if you just have like a standard coat pattern where the sleeve is going to start here at the end of your shoulder, measure from the end of your shoulder, and then just measure to wherever you want the end of your sleeve to sit. If you like really long sleeves, measure it there. If you want them to be shorter, you don't want to be swimming in it, take that measurement kind of a little bit shorter, but just wherever the preference for your sleeve is, that's where you want to take the measurement. Final measurement here is something known as the upper bust or upper chest measurement. And it goes basically around the top part of your chest, and this is the only one that is allowed to be angled, okay? So this is the measurement that we're going to use to figure out if you need to do a full bust adjustment or a small bust adjustment, which we'll discuss briefly, but more than likely you're not going to have to deal with this for a coat pattern, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But basically you want to just take it across the upper part of your chest, allow it to kind of angle down, and then really important when you're taking this measurement, make sure your arms are down. That's going to expand the upper part of your chest and allow you to get an accurate measurement. That is kind of your upper bust measurement, okay? So all of these measurements, again, stand naturally, breathe naturally, and you want all of the measurements to be snug but not tight around your body. We're just trying to get a measure of the dimensions of your body as they are naturally. So don't stand weird, don't suck your inner tube in. Again, these are just numbers, okay? All right. So now that you've got your measurements, and there's a link to this in the blog post, but I will also send out kind of the download with the video recording this afternoon. This is just a little measurement tracker that I made up for you guys so that you can keep tracking your measurements. Because for me, taking my measurements is the part that I hate most about garment sewing. And so if I only have to do it once, I'm going to do that. And if your weight's pretty stable, you don't tend to fluctuate too much, you don't need to take these every time. They're going to be pretty static. So you can just download that and then write your measurements down. And if you sew garments or want to sew garments for anybody else, you can make a couple copies of this and keep their measurements on hand easily as well. It beats kind of the scribbled sticky notes all over the place, which is what I normally do. So I'll send that download out. But these are my measurements that I just took, measured exactly how I described previously. And what I'm going to do is basically compare those to the measurement chart in my garment. So what you're seeing here is the one out of my coat pattern. I'm using the Patchwork Chore Coat by Patchwork and Poodles, I think. Might have butchered that, but we'll see. So what you can see here is that my bust, waist, and hip measurements fall kind of squarely in the large size. Again, I almost wish that they would just like not even put labels on these sizes because they're literally just numbers. Frequently, I'm a large in some patterns, I'm extra large in others, and medium or small in even others. So it's literally just a number. Don't get in your head about this. You just want to figure out where your numbers fit within the range of the size, and that's going to tell you your base size to pick. It's customary to kind of go with your bust measurement to set the base size. In this particular pattern, they're calling it a chest measurement. I think that's because this pattern's kind of geared to be a unisex pattern. Bust or chest, it's the same measurement. So you'll use that to pick your base size. And then if these two sizes happen to, maybe fall in the medium range, there's some things that you can do to kind of grade that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But your base size, the size that you're going to cut out of your pattern, is going to be the size that corresponds to your bust size. Okay, so we talked about that kind of full bust adjustment or small bust adjustment. What that is just adjusting for if, for instance, you are in the case where your upper bust and bust measurements differ by more than 2 inches. So if your bust measurement is more than 2 inches larger than your upper bust, what you want to do is make that full bust adjustment. And there's a link to this in the blog post. I'm not going to go through it here. It's a little bit more complicated than any of the stuff I'm going to show you today. The reason I'm not going to go through it is because unless you're making like a really fitted tailored quilt coat, you're not going to need to make this adjustment. Don't even worry about it, okay? Even if you're in the case where your bust measurement is more than 2 inches larger than your upper bust, it's probably not going to matter. If that's the case, though, use your upper bust measurement to decide your base pattern. Just switch those measurements, okay? Small bust adjustment is going to be the reverse. So your upper bust is less than 1/2 inch different from your bust measurement. Again, it's basically just the reverse of that full bust adjustment, and they go through that in the video that's linked in the blog post. I'm not going to go through it here. These other measurements, my particular pattern doesn't have them. It has some other kind of garment measurements, but they're very strange and they don't really jive with any of these. It's like armpit to armpit, inseam length, right? A lot of patterns will have those. They'll have some extra measurements, or they won't. They'll just have these first three. We're going to talk about where both of these come in just a second, but these are going to be used to kind of set some of the preference measurements for your garment so that you get something you're comfortable in and that you love to wear. I think that's all I had to say on this particular slide. Oh, one more thing. If, for instance, your hip size ends up being smaller than your bust size, right, you're going to cut the larger size out of your pattern initially. And then what happens is that you can actually grade between those two sizes to kind of get it to fit your hips a little bit better if you wanted to. What that would look like is that you'd basically start with the large pattern, and then once you get past your waist, kind of mid bodice height, you would just kind of gradually cut away and connect those lines between the medium and large size in that area and just grade that in a little bit. I know that's kind of warring against everybody's quilter tendencies where we're used to being super precise. Just eyeball it. It's really not critical that you do this perfectly correct. There really isn't a perfectly correct, just kind of grade an eyeball between those two sizes and you'll get something that's a little bit smaller around the hips and fits you a little bit better. Alrighty, so let's talk about some pattern modifications. So the biggest one that you guys are going to encounter is going to be lengthening and shortening of both the sleeves and of the bodice. I'm going to show you what this looks like on the sleeve, but it is exactly the same for your bodice, your front and back measurements. So first things first, what I want to do is kind of measure the length of my sleeve as it is on the pattern, and we're just going to do that by measuring from the bottom to the apex of the sleeve pattern with my tape measure. I'm going to subtract the seam allowance, which you can read off from the pattern instructions. I think for this one it's 3/8, so I'm going to subtract 3/8 at the bottom, 3/8 at the top. That's 3/4 of an inch total from that measurement on the sleeve pattern that I just made. And then I'm going to take that number and compare it to my arm length measurement that I took off my body earlier. I'm going to figure out what that difference is. If my arm length measurement is longer, it's bigger than the sleeve measurement, I'm going to end up wanting to add a little bit of length to my sleeve. If it's shorter, I'm going to subtract some length from the sleeve, and we'll talk about how to do both of those things in a minute. So I'm going to show you how to lengthen the sleeve because that's the modification I always have to do because I'm 5'10", and they just standard pattern sleeves lengths don't fit me. I also like really long sleeves, which doesn't help. But we'll talk here kind of the steps you would take to shorten the sleeve as well. So for lengthening, first, we're going to need, well, for both shortening and lengthening, and let me back up here in just a hot second. I may need to go back. Yeah, so the first thing we need to do is basically find the shortening and lengthening line on your pattern. That's just going to be a horizontal straight line that'll go kind of towards the bottom on both your sleeve and your front and back pieces if you need to make the lengthening or shortening adjustment there as well. So you're going to find that line, and that's where we're going to cut the pattern apart. For lengthening, I'm also going to need an extra piece of paper. This is just a scrap that I had from when I cut my pattern pieces out initially. I'm going to take a ruler and just draw a straight line across the bottom there. And then I'm going to rearrange myself here, and my mat is getting super staticky. And take that ruler and just measure up. For me, I needed to add 1.5 inches of length here, so I'm going to measure 1.5 inches up from that line and then just draw a new line using the ruler 1.5 inches away from the first one, just like that. It's going to give me two parallel lines that are 1.5 inches apart. So now I want to just cut across that lengthening and shortening line. Again, this feels weird. It's okay, I promise. Once I get that cut apart, if I were shortening my sleeve, what I would do is just figure out how much I need to shorten by and then subtract half of that from the top part of the sleeve and half of that from the bottom. So if you were shortening by 1 inch, you just measure 1/2 inch up from this edge and cut that off. 1/2 inch up from the bottom edge here, cut that off, and then tape your pattern pieces back together. Since we're lengthening, I'm going to actually take this piece and tape it down to that first line. Kind of align it up to that line and then just tape it down to that extra bit of paper. I'm using packing tape for this. It works great. Scotch tape, whatever you have on hand will also work. Even masking tape would be fine here. We just want to stick it down to the paper so it's held in place. And then I'm going to take the other half of that pattern and align it to the other parallel line. And we've got to do some alignment here. So I'm just using my ruler to kind of make sure that the vertical line that extended across, that's just a grain line, is in the same place. If you don't happen to have a vertical line on your pattern that you can use this for, just make sure you mark one perpendicular to that shortening and lengthening line before you cut them apart. So once I confirm that everything's nice and lined up, I can just tape that second piece of paper down on that line, which we'll see in a minute here. Okay, so now I've added the 1.5 inches of length, but I still need to deal with kind of these two wings on either side. So I'm going to do that by just kind of smoothing out the line in between them with a ruler, which is what you'll see me doing there. When you're lengthening, it's inevitable you're gonna end up with like a little bit of a corner here sticking out beyond this point. That's just the nature of the beast with patterns. What I'll typically end up doing is just kind of cutting off that corner a little bit in an effort to smooth out that line in between the 2 points. Just eyeball it here. Again, it's not that critical. You do it perfectly correct. And then I'll just trim off that wing. I've done the very same thing to the other side here, and that's where you end up with something that looks like this. Now, there's going to be a little flap on the backside for where you added the paper together. Just tape that down so it's not flapping around on you. And you can do that on both the top side and bottom side just so you end up with a full piece of paper here. And that's it. So now you've added 1.5 inches of length to your pattern piece. It's now the correct length for your sleeve, and you've got a complete pattern that you can use to cut out your pieces. Okay, so again, exact same process is going to happen if you need to lengthen the front and back pieces of your coat. Just make sure that if you're doing that to basically lengthen the hem or shorten the hem, that you add or subtract the exact same amount of length to each pattern piece. You don't want to add like 1.5 inches to the front and 2 inches to the back. That would screw things up when you go to bring the coat together. Things aren't going to want to line up, so just make sure that you add equal amounts to the front and back. But it works exactly the same. There's going to be a lengthening and shortening line there. You just cut apart there and then either subtract or add as you need. Okay? Easy peasy. And I think it just restarted the video. So I'll move on to questions now. Do we have any questions? Let me go back and look at the chat here. Alrighty, somebody says, can you explain more about when you would need the full bust adjustment? So, like I said, this is really, you only want to contemplate it if your full bust and high bust measurements are more than 2 inches different. But basically what it's going to end up being is like just a lot of extra material kind of up here in the upper bodice. So if you've ever had a coat where there's like, you know, it fits snug around your bust, but there's like these extra pockets across the top, that's an indicator that you would need a full bust adjustment there. And basically what it is just adding a dart to the side part of your bust so that it just pulls that fabric down a little bit. Again, if you're making a quilt coat, it's not like super fitted and tailored. You're not going to need to worry about this. You're not even going to notice it. And most of the time on larger sizes anyways, they've already done a little bit of that full bust adjustment. So it's really only needed if you've got like a drastic difference. It is a little bit more complicated. You've kind of got to do a little bit of pattern tailoring to it. Manageable. And there's a YouTube video linked in the blog post for this week as well that'll walk you right through it. But more than likely you're not going to need it. If you forego the full bust adjustment, again, it's just going to be a little extra material up there. That's all it is. Coat will still fit. It'll still look nice. Alrighty. Not seeing any other questions. So with that, I will kind of end here. Quick reminders for this week. The tasks are to get your quilt coat pieces quilted. So that's assuming you're done piecing. If you're not, no worries. You're running a little bit behind. Progress pics are just progress from the previous week. You do not need to be keeping up with the tasks for each week. This was just the original plan set out, and those are the things that I'm going to talk to you each week. You can always kind of work a little bit behind. No big deal. So if you're ready, go ahead and quilt your quilt coat pieces. Make sure you have all the notions you need. So we kind of talked, I think week 2, about some of those critical notions. You're already seeing some of those in use. The flexible tailor's tape measure. Next week, we're going to be using the 28mm rotary cutter. So if you don't have one of those, go and grab it. And then prep your pattern pieces. Make any modifications you need and get them cut out. Go ahead and post a progress photo by April 17th. That'll put you into a drawing for $50 to Threaded Lines Quilt Shop. So Threaded Lines, if you haven't encountered them, is a quilt shop in Texas, but she has a super big online presence, and it's amazing. She carries like all the modern fabrics, Juicy Juice, Libs Elliott, all kinds of things like that, as well as does semi-annual sales where there are some fantastic deals on quilting cotton and all kinds of different fabrics. So if you haven't checked out Threaded Lines yet, please go do so. It's an awesome little small quilt shop with some really great stuff and some really great deals. And so the prize for this week, she's graciously offered a $50 gift certificate to one lucky winner. Okay? Alrighty. Have a great week, and I will see you next week where we'll be talking about constructing our quilt coat. Bye!